We are going to first, before we start, in place of a presentation, we're going to go over the test. So I think it would be a good idea to go around the room and have each person read a question. And if you don't want to, feel free to pass, but I guess we'll start with David Schwartz, because I'm kind of, I guess it's in the order of how people logged in. So we'll start with you.
Oh, we can just have people raise their hands virtually.
Oh, okay, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, so let's do well, you're on the screen now, Lowell, so you can read number one.
David's a sharer, so he's welcome to start.
Oh
yeah,
right.
Bloch is my response to that. I don't know the answer. I should, but I don't know the answer.
It's okay. That's fine. Just read through the question and we'll go through it.
So the question was: the rabbis established a law that one washes their hands before eating bread lechem, that it must be done by pouring from a kus, a cup, into our hands. This was done in order that would force a person pouring the water and not some other force. The rabbis quoted the verse in Bamidbar, V'nasan elav mayim chayim, and he shall put upon him fresh water, as a support for the idea that the water should be poured by a person. This is an example of which of these halachic principles?
So we, if you want, we can go through each one. So
please.
The first one is is sveka d'oraita l'chumra, which means on the source sheet that I gave you guys of the principles, when there's a doubt regarding a Torah obligation, we decide stringently. So that really doesn't apply to this question. The second one, the correct answer is well, who wants to? I'll say it this time, but next time I'll ask, is B, because the second one says kol d'tikun rabbanan, and from now on, my next exam, I'm going to make sure to have transliteration and translations available for each answer, and I apologize for not doing that this time. But anything that the rabbis established, ke'em d'oraita tikun, they tried to do it in a similar way that we find in the Torah. So the rabbis looked for, even though this is a rabbinic decree, washing the hands, right? So the correct answer is B, because that's why they chose to do it, because in a similar place where people pour water on another, it's poured by the force of a person, so they decreed the same thing here. The other two, C and D, hefsek refers to the division between one action and another, and chazaka means we always assume that the status of something or something a person is going to do is going to be similar to what they've done before. That neither of those really apply here. Any questions about the first one? No. Okay. So by a raise of hands, and I don't know if I see everyone at the same time, but by raise your hand to who wants to be ready to read number 2. Any offers?
I can call on people. Monty.
Okay. Thanks.
And Michael, you'll go next.
All the following are exceptions to the rule that hamotzi blessing on bread exempts all of the food eaten during the meal except, and I put D, a surprise casserole delivered to the assembly by a friendly neighbor in the middle of the meal, because this was the one that was unexpected. You expect to eat the meal that's prepared, but you didn't know anything about this.
Yeah, so
I'm assuming it would be kosher on top of it, because then that takes us down a whole different trail.
Yeah, so you're 100% right in your assumption, and the fault here lies with me in not being clear enough when I wrote the question. But you're absolutely right. If what you said, a surprise casserole during the meal, you would have to make a blessing on it because it was completely unexpected. You're 100% right. But I kind of put like a double negative in my question, which made it confusing. So what I was looking for was, which one of these 4 things would you not have to make a blessing on? In other words, are exceptions to the rule. So hamotzi covers everything. So A, if you bring wine to the table during a meal, hamotzi does not cover that, right? So that's an exception to the rule, right? Hamotzi does not cover that. If you eat fruit for dessert, we had a discussion. And if anyone has a question on one of these things, let me know. If you eat fruit for dessert, since that's a dessert, you make a borei pia eitz on that. But a matzah ball in the soup, by a show of, I remember a matzah ball in the soup, that's part of the meal by any standard. So that is definitely covered by the hamotzi. The surprise casserole is not covered. So A, B, and D are all not covered by the hamotzi. They're all exceptions to the rule. Any questions about that? Okay, well, if there isn't, then I'll go on to, and I apologize about my test writing skills. I hope to improve them over time. Yes.
I got on. What was the answer to number one? I'm sorry, I missed it.
The answer to number one was kol de tikun rabbanon ke'en d'oraisa tikun. That anytime the chachamim, the rabbis made a decree, they tried to make it similar to something in the Torah. So far it's number one is B and number two is C. C is the only one in number two which you do not make a blessing because the bread covers it. The other three are all exceptions. All right, who wants to handle number three by show of hands?
Michael Weissman.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
A Gentile Congresswoman, Jane Doe, just returned from a diplomatic trip to Israel, and she spent some time studying her Hebrew skills. She's invited to your shul Shabbat dinner to speak with the congregation about her trip. Her staff asks the rabbi if she can be honored by saying the blessing of hamotzi for the gathering. The rabbi at the affair would like to give her the honor of leading everyone in saying of the blessing, but he is concerned about the violation of a certain halachic principle. The rabbi decides as follows. He introduces the congresswoman and says that Jane Doe is going to lead us in the hamotzi and adds the following. Please remember that when you say the blessing along with Mrs. Doe, please say it quietly to yourselves out of respect for the honorable guest. Which halachic principle was the rabbi concerned about as he tried to diplomatically weasel his way out of potential insult?
Okay. So here I had several answers. I know some people picked B for Berov Am Hadat Malach, which means that it's always an honor to do things in a large group. And again, this is my question, my test writing skills that were deficient, because that is definitely true that it is beautiful to have a lot of people hear the hamotzi together, and you know, which is nice. But the answer I was actually looking for was C. So C says kol she'eino mechuyev b'davar, which means anyone who is not obligated to do a certain act. Eino motzi et rabba midei chovatam. They cannot fulfill the obligation for the public, right? So in other words, since she's a Gentile and she's not obligated in the hamotzi herself, she can't be motzi the public. So everyone sitting there listening has to say it to themselves. They can't listen and say amen, because then they wouldn't be yotzei the mitzvah of hamotzi from someone who's not obligated in the hamotzi herself. So therefore, what the rabbi was trying to do, at least in my imagination, was to tell everyone, kind of hint to everyone to say the hamotzi to themselves quietly, so that she would have the honor of leading everyone, and everyone would be yotzei the mitzvah of hamotzi. So B and C, I saw people answering, but the correct answer that I was looking for was C. The other two, v'chai b'hem, means that, you know, that the Torah's laws are given to live by, not to die by. That would be quite a stretch to imagine how that would be relevant here. In some countries, maybe Congress people might be an issue, but hopefully not in this one. And the other one of shveika d'Rabbanan, it means that that's a doubt in a rabbinic matter that we're lenient. That also wouldn't apply here. Any questions about number three? Because if there isn't, then Lowell, you can pick someone to read number four.
Yosef.
We studied
So,
together.
Reb Saul, can I just ask a question?
Sure, please go ahead.
So if, what about if it's embarrassing the person to the extent that it can harm Klal Yisrael? Is there a principle there?
There's certainly a principle there. And I mean, that clearly is more important than any other. I mean, if it'll harm Jews, then it'll harm people. It's a matter of, in that kind of scenario. I mean, it's better to eat bread without making a bracha than to put people in harm's way. So I mean, if the scenario was such that she would have noticed and it would have seriously harmed legislation and God knows what kind of ramifications, then fine. And it's better to eat bread without a bracha than, I mean, that's way more important, I think. I mean, that would be my answer. But I think in this scenario, I think the rabbi probably could get away with it, but I guess it's a judgment. Anything else? Any other questions?
Okay.
And if not, then we can go on to number 4.
We studied together the concept of hefsek, an interruption, but sometimes the criteria for what constitutes an interruption changes depending on the specific activity. For example, if someone goes to the bathroom after washing his or her hands for bread, they must wash again for bread as this is considered an interruption. On the other hand, if someone goes to the bathroom during the meal, they do not need to make a blessing on Hamotzi in order to continue eating. Why is it an interruption in one case and not the other? Write a few sentences explaining what this tells us about the concept of hefsek. So what I wrote was that hefsek is the term hefsek means interrupting before doing the mitzvah. So if I take the lulav and etrog and don't turn it over and make an interruption between the blessing and the doing it, I have to say the blessing again. So, but there's no mitzvah to continue eating bread or anything else. So an interruption during the meal to go to the bathroom is not an interruption between the blessing and the fulfilling of the mitzvah. I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So that before you do a mitzvah, like after the blessing, a hefsek would be anything that interrupts that flow. But in the middle, then it wouldn't necessarily be a hefsek, and I think that's true. The main idea that I was here, I had a lot of people wrote different things, and they were in general good. What I was specifically looking for was it depends what the action is that you're doing. So the example that I gave is if you wash your hands and then go to the bathroom, the purpose of washing was to be clean. Then you go to the bathroom, you did something dirty, so now you have to wash again. So it is a hefsek. But a meal is not necessarily interrupted if you go to the bathroom or that's part of the same thing. So it's not an interruption. So how you define an interruption also depends on what the act is that you're doing, right? So the same act could be an interruption in one case and not in another. The example that I gave would be the best example I could think of. So it really it depends on and that's why we had all these debates like during a meal after a bracha. If you go outside, we had a debate like if people go outside, is that considered an interruption? Do you have to wash and bench? So some people said, well, going outside is pretty normal, and some people said, well, going outside it's not. It all depends on can that conceivably be considered part of a meal? And people debated that, right? And we had different opinions. So that was the main answer I was looking for. Any other comments or questions about number 4? Okay, so then we can move on to number 5.
So is it also that there's an expectation? I'm sorry. There's an expectation in the meal that it's going to last a long period of time, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's I recall that we discussed it's basically not over till it's over, right? And so you don't, if you, there's a lot of things you could do that's not sitting at the table actually eating that wouldn't interrupt the meal. And going to the bathroom is something that you might have to do in a long meal, right? Especially if you've got a lot of food. So it has to do with expectations.
Yeah, expectations on the outset of of what's I'm trying to think of another example to shed light on this. And one thing that comes to mind is like if you're wearing tefillin and then you take them off and put them back on again, do you need to make another blessing? So it really depends. Like if you take them off and you're still davening and you intend to put them back on, and let's say you took them off so your friend could share it, say, right? But you're still davening, but you have two people and they have one pair of tefillin. So when you take them back, you wouldn't need to make a bracha because that's not a hefsek, right? Because you were still davening and your intent was to put it back on. But let's say you took it off because you wanted to, because you went outside to call with your work or do something that's not related to the davening. So then you did a hefsek because that action was divided. And then when you come back, you have to make a blessing again. I'm trying to think of other examples, but
Could I ask you a question?
Sure.
I know that sometimes when you light Shabbat candles, you can, in your mind, you can say that I'm not accepting the Shabbat yet because you have to do certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible, like when you're doing interruption, you're just saying to yourself, well, it's not an interruption?
Well, I think because Shabbat is there, you have to accept Shabbos upon yourself as long as it's not sundown yet, right? Whereas here, if you actually interrupted, then you did an interruption, no matter what your intention was. The bottom line is you interrupted, So you can walk around saying, I don't want to do this, but if you do it, you did it.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about this one? About a hefsek? If there isn't, then I think you already called on someone to read number 5.
No, I haven't seen any volunteers.
Oh, okay.
Chana.
Okay.
Unmuting. Which of the following principles forms the basis of our obligation to wash our hands before we eat bread?
So this is again the point that I was trying to make is really any rabbinic obligation is because of A, which is lo tasur mikol asher yerucha. You have to do as the rabbis teach. The basis of any rabbinic obligation comes from that verse, which is why we can make a blessing on and say blessed are you, God, Asher Kiddushanu, that you made us holy b'mitzvotav, which are your commandments, and commanded us. But where did God command us to do this if the rabbis did? So the answer to that is in this verse of Lo Tasor. That verse has like bazillions of ramifications. Some might claim it may have too many ramifications, but that's the bottom line. The other ones aren't related. I guess again, it's maybe a issue with my own test writing skills on this question, but most of the people did pick this one up. The other issues, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh, means each person is responsible for one another. Hidur mitzvah might be, so I think a couple of people tried D, because Hidur mitzvah was doing a mitzvah in a nice way, and washing could be considered a nicer way to eat. So that's a reasonable thought. But what I was intending for was A. Any comments or questions on that one? If there isn't, then let's have a volunteer for number 6.
All right, I can do 6.
Okay.
Birkat Hamazon, grace after meals, according to the Torah, must include all the following concepts except.
Do you want to take a stab at it?
Sure, I wrote a prayer for the future restoration of the temple.
And what was the reasoning for that?
That's what you taught us.
Yeah, that is what I taught.
My notes.
And the Torah could not possibly have known. I mean, to the extent that we can say what the Torah knew, that the Beis HaMikdash was going to be destroyed. That happened because we sinned. What if we didn't sin? We'd still have it, right? We'd still have a temple. So the prayer for the future restoration is in Birkat Hamazon, but it was put there after the temple was destroyed. The other 3, the Torah knew about, so to speak, right? God provides our sustenance. He gave us the land of Israel and Jerusalem. He made a special covenant. Those things are, are there. Any comments, questions on that one? If not, let's have a volunteer, hopefully, for number 7. Any volunteers?
Michael again.
Okay. Well, actually, let me have the next volunteer do number 8, because 7 is, I wrote it in a little bit of a, I'll actually, no, we can each, I'll go through number 7, but so the question is true or false. So if one forgets to add ritzeh on Shabbat, you must repeat Birchat Hamazon. So anyone want to say what they think on that one? True or false?
True.
True. Okay, very good. Yes, that's correct. So A is true. The next one is if you forget Ya'aleh v'yavo on Chol HaMoed, right? That's the intermediate days of a holiday, not the first or the last day, but the intermediate days. One must repeat Birchat Hamazon. Is that true or false? We have a volunteer for that one. Okay.
That's false.
Correct. That's false. Okay. And then C, if you forget Ya'aleh v'yavo, which we add on Rosh Chodesh, do you have to repeat Birchat Hamazon?
No, that's false.
Correct. It's false. Good. Very good. Thank you. What if you forget it on Shavuot? You sit down Shavuot night. Do you need to say Do you need to say Birchat Hamazon again?
Yes.
Very good. Yes. So now, how did we figure this out? What was the principle that determines when you do repeat benching if you miss something that's added for the special day, and when you don't repeat benching if you miss something that's added for a special day? Does anyone want to take a stab at that?
Well, do you want me to do it or try?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
If one is obligated to have a meal with bread on Shabbat or Yom Tov, and one forgets the special additions for that day, one must repeat the Birkat Hamazon.
Right.
That's one. And Rosh Chodesh and Chol HaMoed are exempt from the requirement to repeat the Birkat Hamazon if one forgets the special additions for those days.
Exactly. Right. Does anyone? So I'll just reiterate that. So but you're exactly correct. Thank you. That if there's a mitzvah to have a meal, right, that night, so or that day, then a meal, meaning a meal with bread and so on, then you have to add the special addition, and if you don't, you have to repeat Birchat Hamazon, because that's part of the mitzvah of having a meal, is saying that special prayer and benching, which designates this as the meal that's special for the day. Now, if it's not required, so on Rosh Chodesh, for example, or Chol HaMoed, there is no required meal that we have to sit down and have a special holiday meal. It's nice to do, right? But it's not required. So if you don't say the special addition, you don't have to repeat benching. That's the rule of thumb. Now, you can always look it up, but now you know the rule of thumb. You don't have to look it up if you miss Ya'aleh v'yavo or Ritzeh or anything else. Now, number 8. Number 8. Who wants to take a stab at number 8? Any volunteers?
Harold, do you want to read it?
I'm just going to get a clarification on 7, Rabbi.
Okay.
There's if Kol HaMoed is on Shabbat, so there's an obligation for a meal, and one forgets and we forget that, then do we say we have to repeat?
It's a really good question. Thanks for bringing that up. But if you forget Ritzeh, then yes, you would have to repeat it. That's the special Shabbat one. But if you forget Ya'aleh v'yavo, which is special for the holiday, then you would not, because you don't, even though it's Shabbat, it's not required for the holiday if it's Kol HaMoed. That's a cool question. Thanks for bringing that up. Any other questions? Okay, let's move on to 8 then.
Steph, did you want to read it? Is there a hand go up before?
Me? The amount of water one must pour on his hands each time in washing hands for bread is, I put a revi'at.
Yeah, that's correct. A is correct. And the reason, well, because that's what the rabbis decided was about as much as you need to cover the whole hand in one pour. The other things, a kizayit is really a food measurement. It has to do with eating, nothing to do with washing. A full cup, obviously that doesn't mean much because it depends how big the cup is. And just enough to get wet is not true. It's just not correct. It has to be a revi'at. Okay, who wants to take number 9? Anyone want to take number 9?
All right.
Monty, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
Shaul?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, before you get to 9, I actually had a question about that when I was going over the test. And what if you have enough to cover your hands, but it's not a revius? Did you come across that question?
Based on the language of the poskim and where it comes up, I would say that it has to be a revius no matter what. I never saw let's say if the person has a very small hand.
Right. The person has very small hands, or the person's a little kid.
Yeah. But I mean because
there are some sources that say that the point is just to cover your hands. So if that's the point, it should be okay with less than a revius.
Should be. It makes sense.
Question.
I haven't seen that anywhere.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm just putting that out there because that's the question I got wrong on Shavuos night when we were reviewing the test.
Okay.
So I'm trying to get credit for it.
Quick related question.
Yes.
Special. That is, if there is a situation where there is a scarcity of water.
Yes.
And there are multiple people that need to wash.
Okay.
And there's not enough for everyone to have a revi'it. Can the water be rationed in some way so that one would be yotze and still allow others to be yotze?
That is a very interesting question. That is a very interesting question. So how do you ration it? I mean, if I'm right that it has to be a revi'at in order to be yotzei the mitzvah, so then we're dealing with a situation where I'll say a couple things. First of all, according to some poskim, right, we had a machloket, we mentioned this, you only need to wash up to the knuckles, not the whole hand, right? And if I'm wrong about the requirement for revi'at and if enough for your hand, but I don't think I am, so then you might be able to stretch that water a little farther if we just go like that shita, we just do like that opinion and say, okay, everyone just wash up to the knuckles. We might be able to get more mileage out of the water that we have.
Right.
But on the other hand, we're like, let's say, I mean, I guess this would be similar to a case where you have, let's say, a Korban Pesach and you don't have enough for everyone to eat, right? A kizayit. I mean, you're supposed to only count on a Korban Pesach enough so that everyone has a kizayit, right? But what if there's only one lamb and there's 20 people and it's not enough? So how do you divvy up who gets to do the mitzvah? And that is a whole nother question. Assuming if you only have enough for certain people to do the mitzvah, then I don't know. I honestly don't know how you would decide. It's a really good question. I'd have to research and see who has dealt with similar questions before. But some people are going to get to do the mitzvah and some won't. And how you decide that. One thing I could say for sure, definitely don't fight about it.
No, I don't know if I actually saw it or I just heard it somewhere, that you can actually have like 4 or 5 people put their hands one on top of the other, open up, and then it pours on it. And so that way you save a lot of water. But that will be very different from the kazait, because not two people can't chew the same kazait.
I mean, yeah, I don't think that works though, because once the top one, the water is already dirty. Once it's used, we said you can't use it again. Once you use the water for anything, especially for washing. So I don't think that's correct. I think we'd be dealing with this, if you have enough material for for 5 people out of a group of 10 to do the mitzvah, how do you choose who does it? So that's really what you're asking, and that's a really good question. Yes.
I guess I'm asking two. If you assume that a rivi'it is immutable, then yes, that's the question. If the rivi'it is not immutable, then the question becomes, can you fulfill the mitzvah under special circumstances with less than a rivi'it?
Yes. Well, but let's say you can do it with less than a rivi'it and you still don't have enough. You're still left with the same question. How do you divide it up?
True. Yeah.
So,
or Shaul, Rav Shaul, really maybe the question is, if some people could do the mitzvah in a way that's not ideal, but perhaps acceptable, then but more people could do it that way, or should some people do it, less people, in the most permissible way?
Yeah. So
that's really the question. You could have 10 people wash it, just like putting some water on their hands, or you could have 2 people washing it with a revius.
I have an idea. Maybe let's, if everyone's okay with this, next, if I do some research and all of us do a little bit of research on the subject, and next time we come back and have a and have a discussion about this, have a group discussion and see what we come up with, because this is a really good question. It's relevant to not just the washing hands. It could be relevant in a lot of situations. And I would be interested to hear what everyone comes up with. And I'll also do some research. Would people rather we can do that next time, or we can next time do the usual and continue learning the halacha and save that discussion for, say, a couple weeks from now? Maybe let's have a vote.
I'm supposed to write in the Kollel corner this coming week, so maybe let's just do that.
Okay, all right, yeah, you can write that. That would be definitely good, and then we can discuss that next time. You want to do that? All right,
I'll present.
Okay, so then next time, because it doesn't look like I'm going to have a lot of time today to start our new topic, which is the bracha on wine, but we'll get there. So let's fine. So you'll write it up in the Kollel corner. We'll discuss it, and next time in the beginning, and then we'll move on to the next subject. Who wants to read number 9?
I'll do 9. We learned it's nice to have a special cup for use for washing hands, and when possible, to make a blessing on a whole loaf of bread instead of just a piece. These are examples of which of the halakhic principles below? A hidur mitzvah.
Yeah, that definitely. Hidur mitzvah A is the correct answer. Thank you very much. Which means hidur mitzvah means to do a mitzvah in as nice a way as possible. So something artistic, something beautiful, something, is always a nice way to do a mitzvah, which is where we get the artistic and various nice materials for our washing cup. Anyone want to volunteer for number 10? If we don't have, I can read number 10, but someone think who's going to volunteer for number 11. So number 10 is what we say, one must say the blessing of Netilat Yadayim when you're washing your hands before eating. And the time that you do it is before you finish drying your hands. So you wash your hands, and then before you finish drying, you're supposed to wipe them, all right? You're supposed to make the bracha and then complete the drying. What principle is the reason for that? So I explained this is a very basic principle for all brachot, for all blessings, which is over le'asiyatan, which is B. And the principle of over le'asiyatan means before you perform the act. Now, since here your hands are dirty before you wash, so we don't want you to really make the bracha blessing before you wash your hands. So instead, we say do it before you complete the act. But in almost all other cases, let's say you're putting on your tefillin, you're supposed to say the blessing before you put the tefillin on, or so that you don't do any part of the mitzvah without the blessing that preceded it. Any questions about that? If there isn't, let's hit number 11 then. We have a volunteer.
I'll do
Okay.
11. This is D, I believe. Chazaka.
Yes.
And so like the reason is that the day, one of the reasons is the day before is not Shabbos, so you wouldn't have this custom or whatever to say Ritzeh.
Right.
So you need in order for it to be, so you don't have to repeat it, you need to have it something like that you've done it multiple times, a chazaka or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. That's correct. Thank you very much. Right. Yeah. So the point is that, like you said, that if we expect you to do what you usually do, and since all week you say Birchat Hamazon without Ritzeh, we assume you did what you usually did. Shabbos is just 1/7 of the days of the year, right? So we assume you did it more like what you do 6 out of 7. All right. Who would like to read number 12?
F. Mendelson.
Okay.
It is better for one person to say the blessing of a motzi than for everyone to say it for themselves. Which halachic principle is the reason for this? And Barova Am.
Yes, you want to explain it to everyone? But it's perfect. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, I mean, the concept is that it's better. I'll say I don't fully understand the concept.
Okay.
Okay. But the concept is it is better to have a large group together for the performance of a mitzvah, but the better way to do it is to have one person lead and everyone else be yotzei or say amen to it, as opposed to everyone say it amongst themselves. The only reason I can think of that is that if everyone's saying it amongst themselves, they're not really together, because everyone goes at different speeds and some people are starting and stopping, and it becomes a little bit of balagan. So this way, if there's a leader and everyone answers, it's more unified.
Yes. Yeah, and I kind of think like if you're it's the pasuk is talking about the honor of a king is better when there's a lot of people. So if you imagine a stadium full of people giving honor to a king, and everyone's babbling and doing their own thing and jabbering, right? It's not such honor. But if everyone says in unison, "Long live the king" or whatever, then that's an honor, So if I think of it that way, it kind of makes sense. Any questions or comments? Anyone want to volunteer for number 13?
To use your hand up still.
Oh, it's still up. I didn't take it off, but I'll answer it if you want me to.
Okay, go ahead. Fire away.
Because this was actually my response from the first week. Is the opinion of the speech qualify as speaking the bracha? I put A, but I'm not sure if
yes,
that was
A is correct. A is the right.
Okay.
Thank you. Do you want to explain why you thought it was A? Or?
Well, my Hebrew is very bad, so I was going off of your source sheet, but like in the situation that I had to write about, a person who had their larynx removed because of cancer, thinking the blessing, counted as speech because they couldn't, they can't speak, and the ancient rabbis would never have even thought that kind of thing was possible. So,
yeah, that's very good. Yeah, and I'm glad my source sheet worked. But I'm going to try to keep sprucing it up, so that it helps, regardless of people's language skills. But you did get it, so it did work this time. And the point there, like, is achari rabim lahatos, right? That because the overwhelming majority of rabbinic authorities disagreed with Maimonides, with the Rambam on this one, that's why the generally accepted law is that thought does not count as speech, right? it's not. There's many exceptions to the rule of we go based on the majority. So, for example, we don't like count up 100 rabbis and say 51 said this and 49 said that. All of a sudden, the law becomes like the 51. It doesn't work that way. And sometimes the person's stature matters, but more often than not, what really matters is what becomes accepted by the public. So you may have certain customs that might have been minority opinions one day, but they became accepted customs. So that really ends up becoming more established as a law. So sometimes it's the stature of the person who said it. In this particular case, the Rambam is one of the highest statures of any rabbinic authority in history. However, and if there's some other person who's not well known, who's not, who doesn't have quite the same pedigree, or pedigree is not the right term, but so then you might say, well, hey, the person that we trust more, we might go by rather than counting up the numbers. So there's many exceptions to this rule, but in general, if there's an overwhelming majority, that's what we generally decide according to the majority. So very good. Thank you for that. Anyone want to shoot for number 14?
David, is that a hand? Sure.
Actually, my hand was a question about the,
sure, please go
the
ahead.
pedigree.
Right.
And so the question is, where does yichus?
That's why I corrected myself. I should not have used it. It was a very bad choice of words. And but yichus, when it comes to a posek, means absolutely nothing. Shmaya v'Avtalion were converts, and they were very competent halachic authorities. So yichus has zero to do with it. It has to do with Torah knowledge and a person's character and so on. But
thank you.
But yeah,
Dr.
go ahead.
Saul, what if the circumstances are such that it might be dangerous to say a brocha aloud? Then the person is forced to think about it. Then what?
Well, then absolutely, under that circumstance, then one should either say it quietly, and if that's impossible, even think it. If even by moving your lips, you're in danger, and clearly your personal safety, which kind of leads us to the next question, if you want to read that for us.
Okay. In our discussions, we said that although one should not make a blessing when eating food that is not kosher, if one must eat it for reasons of preserving their life, then most authorities say that we should make a blessing. Which halakhic principle is the reason for this?
Okay.
It's
okay. I can help with the answer.
Yes, so the life versus the death. Yes,
exactly, which is C, right?
Yeah.
And I think it was the Taz who was one of the great commentators on the Shulchan Aruch. I think he's the one that said this first, but he said, by eating non-kosher food in this scenario, you're doing a mitzvah, the mitzvah of preserving your life. So you certainly should make a blessing in this kind of scenario because, because in this case, this is the mitzvah for you. Now the last one. This I'm going to open the floor. I'll say what the question was, and that was one of the questions we dealt with was, and a lot of topics we talked about, washing the hands and blessings in general, were rabbinic decrees, right? And obviously the ones we learned about are rabbinic decrees that we keep to this day. We say Ritzei, we say Yalav Yavo, we say these special prayers, we say these special blessings, we wash our hands. We learned about the law of making a blessing of Hamotzi on so on. And all of these are rabbinic decrees. There are some rabbinic decrees which we no longer do. We learned about Mayim Achronim, right? The water that people wash after the meal. We hold it's no longer required. So how do we pick and choose between what we continue doing today and what we don't have to do anymore? And let me give you an example. If one of the reasons for washing the hands was cleanliness, I kind of mentioned what if you use hand sanitizer, or what if you wash with soap? Well, it's not a perfect analogy because there's other reason. There's special reasons of tahara, of holiness, which has nothing to do with physical dirt. But But I wanted to put it out there. If people have thoughts about this, then let's have a few minutes of discussion about it. There are some rules, but it's not 100% clear, what we can say doesn't apply anymore and what we can say does always apply. Anyone have thoughts? Go ahead.
Shal, can you explain again why you think Shavuos 2 days does apply?
Well, it is accepted among Orthodox rabbis that on Shavuot we keep 2 days outside Israel, right? And the Gemara actually deals with the question of, well, what if we know the origin of the custom started because they didn't yet, before there was a set calendar, the people outside Israel didn't yet know what day was the first day of the month. So because of doubt, they would keep the holiday for 2 days just in case, because they didn't know which day was the right one. That's the origin of the custom. The question then becomes, now that we have a set calendar, and you and I can just open up your calendar and see what day the 6th day of Sivan is. So why now do we need to do it any longer? And the Orthodox custom is to continue now, but why? If the reason is gone. So I can tell you the reasons that's given, but it's not 100% clear. The reason that the Gemara gives is because the Gemara already asked this question because they were already in Babylon, because minagavosem biyadem, which means that they're keeping the customs of their father. We keep the second day as a custom because that's the custom of the people in the exile, right? Not because the reason applies anymore, but that's the custom. That's the way it's done. It literally, I'm sorry, I see you're saying something, Brian.
But then you could say the same thing though of the custom of washing hands.
Yes, you could say that. You can also say, well, washing hands before the meal, one might say the reason still applies, so the law still applies.
Correct.
Whereas washing after the meal, where the reason no longer applies and the custom has not continued, so that fell away. Now, why did this custom continue and this custom not continue? I'm putting out questions, not putting out that many answers, but it's not 100% clear, why certain things continued that way and why certain things didn't. But the bottom line, as far as the second day of the holiday is because of the custom. That's what the Gemara says, because the custom was that way. So therefore we continue. We do. Go ahead.
But then why in Israel don't they do it that way for the same reason?
Because the custom never developed in the land of Israel, because they knew the day they knew the day of the Rosh Chodesh, because they were close to where it was being declared. So the custom in Israel never developed that way.
There is another explanation completely, which won't change until the Mashiach comes, which is that we don't know where the international dateline is. So the international dateline only started when they discovered America, and it was a man-made decision where it was going to be, right? Because on one side of Hawaii, today is already tomorrow, and it's already Thursday. On the other side, it's still Wednesday. It's the same exact sunset and sunrise and everything. Yeah. And so Rabbi Yehuda Halevi said that the dateline should be in the land of Israel, and therefore anywhere east or west should still have another day, because we don't know where the international dateline is.
Yeah, the international dateline is a very interesting subject, and what the halachic dateline should be is also a very interesting subject. So we should probably have a special day devoted to discussing that. But especially during World, I'm sorry. Yeah, we'll have to. Well, I want to put a hold on that question just because it's a big topic.
Harold had his hand up, and then Michael Weissman also.
I was just going to say that the Julian calendar was developed before the Talmud, and so as Shaul was saying, the Gemara specifically addresses this topic, and it seems like if the rabbis specifically address the topic in the Gemara, it would be very difficult for subsequent rabbis to change it unless it were specifically for something where we now know something entirely different, but we don't really know anything entirely different on observance the second day. So it would be very difficult for rabbis now to sort of say, well, actually, they got it wrong in the Talmud.
Right. It's a very good point. Very good point. Yeah, if the Talmud already dealt with the issue and gave us a decision, 100% agree that that we're not, it's at least in Orthodoxy, that's not what we do. We don't negate what the Talmud said.
Well, on Shavuos, when Chaim Fruchter came to visit, we went over some of the questions with him, and he said, "No, my Machronim should still be a thing. I don't know why they got rid of it," and he does it in his home. So
well, but there are plenty of postscript that say otherwise. I mean, but people do it still.
There are things that were talked about in the Gemara that have changed. So
I wrote that anyone who's ever touched spicy pepper and then touched their eyeball after eating should probably reconsider mine.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. I like that. So we might not have. We might not have melach Sodom, the salt from Sodom, but we have plenty of hot stuff. It's a very good point. Okay, I think I appreciate. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight. I'm sorry that I didn't get to move forward, but next time we will move on with the blessings. And thank you everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.